Can everybody hear me? All right. It was kind of different what you guys heard there. That was a soundscape that I made. It's based on a legend from Puerto Rico. The legend, we call it La India Dormida. La India Dormida translates to the sleeping Indian woman. That legend is about an Indian woman who's forced to say goodbye to her lover as he goes off to fight the Spanish conquistadors. She waits for him on the top of the mountain because the top of the mountain was where it was safe. And as she waits for him, she loses hope because he doesn't come back. She sees the sun rise and she sees the sun set, and he doesn't return. So she loses hope. She gets tired and she falls asleep. And what we're hearing in that piece is, it is what she's hearing in her sleep. We're hearing what she is experiencing subconsciously. What you hear in the beginning are the sounds of the island, the sounds of the rainforest, the coqui. You hear the múcaro. You hear all of these animals and all of these sounds that reflect Puerto Rico and the rest of the Caribbean. But then you hear something below all of those sounds. You hear the call to Taína. Taína is our indigenous ancestors, our indigenous people. When every time she's called by one single person. Make note of that as I keep continuing with the explanation. She's called by one person. By the second call, there is an intensity that comes in. Huracana Yuki Juhan. That is a prayer, a Taíno prayer. And it states, it is a call for a renewing and a cleansing. It is a call to freedom. Once this is said, there's another call to Taína. The people are trying to wake her up. The people are trying to wake her up from her sleep. Once this is said, there is an alarm that blares. That alarm is a tsunami alarm, which is something very real that happens throughout the Caribbean. It is something that stands for not only tsunamis, but it stands for war. It stands for a breaking point. When this is said, you hear the entire atmosphere change. And it changes from the peaceful sounds of the Caribbean, the peaceful sounds of the nature, and into the chaos that ensues. The chaos that everything is just culminating to, which is something that every single island in the Caribbean and beyond, and I know a lot of people here can relate to that, is happening. It's very real to us right now. That chaos, that protest from inside of us that's coming out. The protest of the people, it's coming out. Towards the end, as everything just comes together into this really just big chaos, there's another call to Taína. It's desperate. It's a desperate call for her to wake up. Then we hear the guns, we hear the protests, we hear the disruption. Following all of this, there is a lot of symbolism that follows this. The drums, they are bomba. That is That is a musical style from the island, from Puerto Rico. And it's a symbol of resistance. What you hear in the last part, the song that you hear in the last part, it's in Spanish. And it translates to, one day my mother gave me a seed with a past. This is the next generation. This is the people that's coming after us, realizing what they are given has a past and realizing that they need to make a change. The last time that Taina is called, she's not called by one person. She is called by all of them together. Every single person that called her before now calls her in unison. And it is the only reason she wakes up. She wakes up because there is a unison. She wakes up because she realizes that the fight is still going on and there is still hope. Now, understanding all of this, I would like for you to listen to it one more time.
In your programs, you can see that there is a page and it's titled, What Happened to Hawaii? That song is by famous Puerto Rican rap and reggae singer, or reggaeton, Bad Bunny. It's the only song that he has taken out, that he has done, that has impacted me.
Your device is disconnected.
That has impacted me in a great way. And that's why I wanted to bring it today, because he wrote it for Puerto Rico, but right now we see this across the globe. You can read the lyrics. They won't rhyme because I try to make the translation in a way that is completely faithful to the integrity of the song itself. I will sing in a cappella, so bear with me. Ella se ve bonita, aunque a veces le vaya mal. En los ojos una sonrisa, aguantándose llorar. La espuma de sus orillas parecieran de champán. Son alcohol para las heridas, para la tristeza bailar. Son alcohol para las heridas, para la tristeza bailar. En el verde monte adentro aún se puede respirar. Las nubes están más cerca, con Dios se puede hablar. Se oye el jíbaro llorando, otro más que se marchó. No quería irse pa' Orlando, pero el corrupto lo echó. Y no se sabe hasta cuándo. Quieren quitarme el río y también la playa. Quieren el barrio mío y que abuelita se vaya. No, no, sueltes tu bandera ni olvides el Lelolay. Que no quiero que hagan contigo lo que le pasó a Hawái. Aquí nadie quiso irse, quien se fue sueña con volver. Si algún día me tocara, que mucho me va a doler. Otras jíbaras luchando, una que no se dejó. No quería irse tampoco y en la isla se quedó. Y no se sabe hasta cuándo. Quieren quitarme el río y también la playa. Quieren el barrio mío y que tus hijos se vayan. No, no, sueltes la bandera ni olvides el Lelolay. Que no quiero que hagan contigo lo que le pasó a Hawái. No, no, sueltes tu bandera ni olvides el Lelolay. Que no quiero que hagan contigo lo que le pasó a Hawái.
I am hoping that you guys are now waiting for me to follow up with that, okay? I give up, but as a Hispanic myself, from the Caribbean, we have seen that this has happened in many, many different ways throughout different countries. So thank you again for the lovely moment that we just had. So thank you, Samara. I'm here now to go ahead and take the lead to go ahead and introduce the guest of the night. You guys are all guests, but we have a special guest for the evening. And what is better than one Miguel? I think it's better. Two Miguels are better, okay? So, with pleasure, I would love to go ahead and introduce tonight's guest and speaker, Dr. Miguel A. de la Torre, international scholar, documentarian, novelist, academic author, and scholar activist. The focus of Dr. de la Torre's academic pursuit is social ethics within contemporary U.S. thoughts, specifically how religion affects the race, class, and gender oppression. Since obtaining his doctoral in 1999, he has authored over 100 articles and published 50 books, six of which won national awards by year's end. He presently serves as the professor of social ethics and Latinx studies at the Ilf School of Theology in Denver. A Fulbright scholar, he has served within his guild as the 2012 president of the Society of Christian Ethics, is the recipient of the 2020 AAR Excellence in Teaching Award and the 2021 Martin E. Marty Public Understanding of Religion Award. Within the Academy, he served as the past director of the American Academy of Religion and sat as the editorial board of JAAR. Additionally, he is the co-founder and executive director from 2013-2017 of the Society of Race, Ethnicity, and Religion, and he is the founding editor of the Journal of race, ethnicity, and religion. Dr. De La Torre has written numerous articles in popular media and has served on several civics organizations. Recently, he wrote the screenplay to a documentary, Trails of a Hope of Terror, on immigration, which has screened in over 18 film festivals, winning over 7 awards. Additionally, he has written an autofiction magical realism novel titled Miguelito's Confession. I haven't read in Spanish in a very long time, so excuse me if I don't get it completely right, okay? Doctor Miguel A. de la Torre, académico internacional, documentalista, novelista, autor, catedrático y activista académico. El enfoque de la búsqueda académica del Doctor de la Torre es ética social dentro del pensamiento contemporáneo de los Estados Unidos, específicamente cómo la religión afecta la opresión, raza y clase de género. Desde que obtuvo su doctorado en 1999, ha escrito más de 100 artículos y publicado 50 libros, 6 de los cuales han ganado premios nacionales hasta finales de año. Actualmente se desempeña como profesor de ética, ha servido en su gremio como el presidente de la Sociedad de Ética Cristiana en 2012. Él fue destinatario del Premio a la Excelencia de la Enseñanza de la AAR en el 2020 y el Premio Martin E. Marty a la Comprensión Pública de la Religión en el 2021. Dentro del ámbito académico, fue director de la Academia Americana de Religión y formó parte de la Junta Editorial de JAAR. Además, fue cofundador y director ejecutivo de la Sociedad de Raza, Etnicidad y Religión desde el 2013 al 2017 y el editor fundador del diario de Raza, Etnia y Religión. El doctor De La Torre ha escrito numerosos artículos en medios populares y ha participado en diversas organizaciones cívicas. Recientemente escribió el guión de un documental llamado Trails of a Hope of Terror, traducido como Verdades, Esperanza y Terror, el cual habla sobre inmigración. El mismo se ha presentado a más de 18 festivales de cine y ha ganado más de 7 premios. Además, ha escrito una novela de realismo mágico autoficcional titulado en español Las Conferencias de Miguelito. Help me welcome our speaker, Dr. De La Torre.
Buenas noches. Gracias por la invitación a estar con ustedes. Thank you so much for the invitation to be with you all. It was June 21st, 1960, when I received a letter from the United States government telling me that I was in violation of Section 242 of the Immigration and Nationalization Act. In other words, I overstayed my tourist visa. From that moment forward, I was an undocumented immigrant, what many people like to call an illegal immigrant. The question I want to ask tonight is, why did I come? Why am I here? Now, for some, I came looking for freedom and liberty. For others, I came to suck up all of your free social services. Both of those answers are wrong. I came because of bananas. Let me explain. In the 1870s, Americans did not know what bananas were. Because of the lack of refrigeration, you could never get bananas up to the north and northeast. So when the World Fair occurred, bananas was first introduced in Chicago. And people went bananas over bananas. By 1899, over 16 million bushels a year of bananas were being sold. The problem is, you needed corporations to get those bananas from America Central to the north and northeast. Hence was created the United Fruit Company. So I'm going to use one country as an example, Guatemala. In Guatemala, the dictator at the time, Manuel Estrada Cabrera, gave free rein to the United Fruit Company to grow bananas. In return, the United Fruit Company built roads and railroads and docks so they could get the bananas to the northeast and the northern part of the United States. Now, whenever the United Fruit Company was threatened by a country in Central America who wanted to declare their own sovereignty, the U.S. would send in the Marines to overthrow that government. Basically, this is what Teddy Roosevelt would call gunboat diplomacy, speaking softly but carrying a big stick. In other words, the military's purpose in Latin America was to maintain law and order so that multinational corporations can make a profit. Now, in the 1950s in Guatemala, 70% of the land was owned by the elite and the multinational corporations. 2.2% of the population, mostly indigenous, owned the other 30% of the land. Owned the rest of the land, but the indigenous population only owned 10% of the land. And it was the worst land, because the best land was saved for the multinational corporation. Now, Jacobo Arbenez decided to run for president in a democratically open election. And he won the election on a platform of very minor land reform. Basically, the land reform was that whatever the corporation said the land was worth, the government will pay them that amount of money to take the land and then distribute it among the population. The problem is that the United Fruit Company undervalued the value of their land to pay less taxes. Therefore, they did not like that idea. So what they did was they contacted two of their former attorneys who used to work for the United Fruit Company, but were now basically working for the U.S. government. They were brothers. The last name was Dulles. One was the Secretary of State. The other one was the head of the CIA. Now, up to this time, during the Truman administration, basically the purpose of the CIA was to gather information about other countries. But with the Eisenhower administration, Ike was concerned about another war, so he had a more proactive idea of what the CIA should be doing. That is, overthrowing governments so that we don't find ourselves in another war. The first government we overthrew was the president of Iran, and installed instead the Shah, which of course didn't go off very well, if you all remember what happened a couple of decades after that. The second government we overthrew was Guatemala in 1955. We basically got a couple of ex-soldiers from Guatemala who were up in the mountains. We paid them money, and we said it was a civil war. We hired the Fifth Avenue to do this campaign of this fight against communism, and it was effective. After something like 30,000 dead, the government was overthrown, 30-year civil war. It was horrible. But what we learned from that is how to overthrow other governments. In the last century, the United States invaded the countries on the Caribbean basin 21 times. My own country was invaded 3, Cuba. That doesn't count the other 26 times that the CIA overthrew a government through covert operation. So that's 47 times that we did regime change. That's almost one every other year in the last century. Hold that thought. I'm going to go a little bit further back. Manifest destiny. Basically, there was this quasi-religious idea that as the new Israel, God has given us this land. The problem was there were other people on the land that had to be genocide so we could get title to the land, and there was other countries in the way, i.e. Mexico. Now, when Andrew Polk ran for president, James Polk, I'm sorry. Or was it Andrew Polk? James Polk, I was right, James Polk. When James Polk ran for president, thank you, he ran on a campaign promise that if he's elected president, he would invade Mexico. And within weeks after being elected, he kept his campaign promise. So he made up this excuse to get U.S. soldiers into Mexico. Mexicans seeing U.S. soldiers crossing the borders fired back. James Polk went to Congress and asked for a declaration of war. This was back in the days when the president had to ask Congress to declare war. We don't do that. We don't bother with those things anymore. Now, sitting in Congress at the time was a former president by the name of John Quincy Adams. And John Quincy Adams basically said on the floor of the House, and I'm pretty much quoting, I fear today our union I fear today the banners of our union will represent tyranny for what we're about to do to Mexico. Many years later, when Ulysses S. Grant, who fought in that Mexican-American War, was dying of throat cancer, writing his memoirs in New York City, he wrote, and again, I'm pretty much quoting, just as our sovereign God punishes individuals for their sins, so too does God punish nations. And I have no doubt God has punished us with the Civil War for what we did to Mexico. Now, this invasion of Mexico was highly profitable. Think of all the silver of Nevada, all the gold of California, all the oil of Texas, all the natural borders along the California coast, all the copper of New Mexico and Arizona, and the multitude of minerals in my own state where I'm from, Colorado. Now, by the time we get to the 20th century, you have a rise of empire. In other words, you had the Berlin Conference in the 1888 or 86, I forgot, and where they basically got together and divided Africa among the European powers. And the United States felt left out because they weren't part of that. So a few people, Theodore Roosevelt, Jeffrey Mahan, who was a novelist, Dewey, who ended up being the head of the Navy, and Cabot Lodge, who was a senator, all got together at the Manhattan Club, and together they decided we need a war that would make us an imperial power. So at the time, my particular country was fighting Spain for 30 years trying to get its independence. So a ship blows up on the harbor of Havana. The bomb was inside the ship going outwards, so it was a boiler pretty much exploding. And that became the excuse to enter the Cuban War for Independence and change it to the Spanish-American War, leaving us totally out of the picture. So on January 1st, 1899, when you have the ceremony of the flag, where you bring down the flag of the colonizer and the free people raise their own flag, the Spanish flag came down and the U.S. flag went up. And the Cubans who fought for 30 years were not allowed into the city of Santiago to bid the Spaniards goodbye. Now, I say this because this change is that the United States was afraid that if we were to acquire Cuba and make them part of the nation, and this is from many of the newspapers' articles at the time, we will be including in our union a Mongol race made of Africans and Indians and the lowest type of Europeans, which were the Spaniards. And we did not want those type of people polluting the purity of our union. So the shift went from acquiring land, colonialism, to instead acquiring economies. So what we wanted was the economic power of these nations, but not the people. Because the people were inferior and therefore would be a detriment to the Union. Okay, hold that thought. They're all going to come together eventually. I want to talk about corn. Okay, I said bananas, but also corn was important here. So, according to the World Bank, which has never been the friend to the poor, even they say that the greatest cause of world poverty is the $1 billion a day we spend on subsidizing crops. Because the subsidizing of crops prevent people from growing their own. So, in 1994, the United States entered into an agreement which was called NAFTA. Corn is the food of Latin America. Every Latin American country has a corn dish. That they have their own name for a corn dish. Corn was first domesticated in Central America. And then it spread up north, it spread down to the south. You could grow corn in high altitude, low altitude, heavy rain, no rain. Corn grows everywhere. A lost Columbus found the corn and took it back to Europe, and it spread there too. So corn is the food of the people. When NAFTA occurred, think about this. The United States spends $41.9 billion on subsidies, corn subsidies, from 1995 to 2004, the first 10 years of NAFTA. So what happens? It became cheaper to buy U.S. corn in Mexico than to grow your own corn. So now farmers could no longer afford to grow corn. Corn prices plunged by 70% in Mexico, while all the other essentials of life increased by 247%. Tortillas went up by 483%, and 1.7 million farmers lost their farms after NAFTA. So, here you have, for generations going back centuries, you would grow corn, a third went to feed your family, a third went to the market to buy goods, and the other third, basically, you could sell and make some money on it. Now you lost the farm. So when NAFTA was signed, what Mexico wanted to do was change Mexico from an agricultural economy to an industrial economy. So they wanted the farmers to lose their farms, so they will go up to the factories and work. And these factories all came along the U.S. border. And Ross Perot was right. That sucking sound you hear is jobs leaving the United States. And they did, and they went south of the border, where they would pay a lot less money. Now, if only we would have known that this would cause an immigration crisis. Okay, we didn't know. You see, every time a legislation is passed, the GAO does a study to find out what the impact of that legislation is going to be economically. And in 1993, a year before NAFTA was signed, the GAO said that if NAFTA was signed, we would have an immigration crisis. So what the liberal president at the time, Clinton, did, and liberals aren't exactly all that great for us Latino folks, what the liberal president did was that he implemented Operation Gatekeeper. And the idea was to make the border so hazardous, so unsafe, that people were going to die crossing it. But that's okay, because if they die, they'll deter other people from crossing the border. Obviously, nobody got deterred. There were more deaths on the border. Every 3 days, 4 brown bodies perish in the desert. Think about that. This is the greatest human rights violation going on in this country at this time. And no one says much about it. Okay, so let's try to put all this together. You have gunboat diplomacy. You have manifest destiny and the move to acquire other people's economies. And then you have an immigration policy that is based on killing brown bodies. My own country, what's been stolen from us is our sugar, our tobacco, and our rum, the three necessities of life. And here's the point. When one country builds roads into another country for the express purpose of stealing their raw materials and their cheap labor, why are we shocked that people take those same roads following everything that has been stolen from them? I am here in this country following what has been stolen from me. This empire we call the United States was built on my cheap labor and my resources. Now, I know many Christian churches and many good liberals would say things like, well, we need to take care of the immigrants because we need to show hospitality. We need to be hospitable to the stranger among us. The problem is that this house was built with my resources, and therefore I don't want your hospitality, I want my house back. I want my house back. The Latino community has a lien against this house, and it's time to pay up. So it's not an issue of hospitality and the graciousness of a very kind North American neighbor is an issue of what is due to those from whom we have stolen so much from. So we have this immigration problem, which cannot be fixed. It can't be fixed because it's too profitable to have the system broken. The prison system, which is now a privatized system, makes so much money. These two corporations were going bankrupt until NAFTA was signed. And now they're multi-billion-dollar businesses because of what they charge the government to house undocumented immigrants before they ship them back. So these corporations are not, if we were to fix the immigration problem, these corporations will go bankrupt, which will negatively impact the stock market. We can't fix the immigration problem because too many politicians are getting elected on this issue, including the person who is the president right now, who launched his first campaign talking about those of us who are rapists and drug pushers and have many, many problems. So, how do we find hope in the midst? We don't. It is hopeless. It is hopeless. Let me explain what I mean by that. If I use Eurocentric philosophical or theological thoughts to try to help my communities of color, I am participating in my own people's oppression. Because these philosophical and theological thoughts have been designed to enhance white supremacy at the expense of minoritized communities. So concepts like hope, which sounds great, create a false illusion in where we don't have to do anything because it's in God's hands, and therefore the structures remain the same. I learned this lesson when I took a group of students to Cuernavaca, Mexico. And we went there to study the connection between the poor and the poor in Mexico and the rich in the United States. And one particular night, as we were unpacking, one of the students said, these people live in such horrible condition, but when I looked into the eyes of the little girl, I saw the hope in her eyes. And at that point, I had an epistemological meltdown. Because what I said was, I'm not quite sure what you saw in her eyes, but in about 5 to 10 years, she's going to be turning tricks to put food on the table or be stuck in an abusive marriage. There is no hope for this little girl. She was born into poverty. She will die in poverty, as her children and grandchildren will, because the structures are designed to make the life of these people even worse than they are today. See, what I understand is that, and if I was to come and say, well, all good things work for good for those who love God and are called according to God's purposes, that sounds trite, and that sounds insulting for people who are dying. And the reason I say is because, when I say hope, I'm saying it in Spanish, esperanza. And what's esperanza? It comes from the word what? Esperar, which means to wait. And sometimes we don't know how long we're waiting. And while we're waiting, our people are dying. So this nice word, hope, that you all have for us Latino folks, it has a different side to it that talks about the problem of waiting. So, as MLK said, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. I kind of believe the moral universe could care less. And if we're going to bend towards justice, we're the ones that have to do the bending. And what prevents us from doing the bending is hoping in the moral universe. See, I'm influenced by Ecclesiasticus, first chapter, first verse. Vanity of vanity, says the teacher, absolute fertility, everything is meaningless. My people live in the horror of Saturday. All they know is the crucifixion of Thursday. All they know is the blood and the gore. They're stuck in the Saturday. I hear that there will be a Sunday resurrection, but we're not there yet. And if I'm going to be in solidarity with my people, I have to learn to keep my mouth shut, not preach about the good news of tomorrow, and sit with them in the dust of Saturday if I'm going to be of any use. Because if all I do is provide hope, I contribute to their oppression, because hope is a middle-class privilege. You see, I could have hope as long as I have enough money in my account to send my kids to college. Hope is easy, no matter how bad things are. I could have hope if I have education enough that if I lose my job, I'm sure I'll find another one. But when you have nothing, those are the people I need to be in solidarity with. And I learned this lesson when I went to Auschwitz. They have this sign over the entrance gate which says, work will set you free. You see, if I read that and I walk through those gates, I think, well, if I keep my head down, if I don't make eye contact, if I follow all the rules, maybe I'll survive. Hope leads me to the ovens. And it domesticates me so I don't fight back. What I am calling for is what I called in one of my books a badass Christianity. And what I mean by that, it rejects a hope that provides easy fixes to complex situations that gives me permission not to do anything to change the situations I'm in. I'm influenced by a philosopher called Miguel de Unamuno, a third Miguel. He lived 100 years ago. And he says, there's no way that you can prove God exists. And there's no way you can prove God does not exist. So you just have to choose. And when you choose, we call that faith. So I have chosen to believe in the God that may or may not exist. And it really doesn't matter, because faith has me believing in what may or may not be real. And as long as I have that choice to believe, then that shapes the kind of life that I want to live. So I'm usually asked, why do I fight for justice? Well, knowing that I already lost, why keep fighting for justice? Seriously. Racism is going to be around hundreds of years after I'm gone. This immigration crisis, I'm looking back 20 years when it was a lot nicer and kinder. And it was horrible back then. It's only gotten worse. And it's going to continue to get worse. So why fight? I do not fight for justice because I expect to get an extra ruby in my crown when I get to heaven. That makes my faith transactional, which I find insulting. I fight for justice even though I know I'm going to lose, because winning or losing is not the issue. Fighting for justice is what defines my faith, and more importantly, it defines my humanity. I fight for justice because I have no other choice if I'm going to say who I am. Now, the beauty of hopelessness is that you don't burn out. I mean, really, how many people enter a social service type thing and they're going to change the world and the world doesn't change, and then what do? They sell real estate or something else because, but see, because I'm hopeless, I know I'm not going to change the world. I'm called to just fight the good fight, and I'm not the savior. Someone else did that already. I'm just there to be faithful to what I say I believe. Privilege, of course, always allows you to walk away. And I have privilege, I'm a professor. They don't pay you that much, but it's not a bad job, not a bad gig. So I could walk away. But if I do, my community would rise up and hold me accountable. And I can't do that. So, it's hopeless. What becomes the ethical response? We now go to the police department to get a permit from the police department so we could protest the police department for police brutality. We have domesticated protests. We're the only country that you can drive to a march. Think about the privilege of driving to a march. So I could go ahead, I could make my sign, down with whatever. I could go to the march, wave my sign, take pictures of myself, post it on Facebook, and say, yay, we have domesticated protest so it changes nothing but makes us feel good about ourselves. As long as we continue to follow the rules created by those who made the rules to reinforce our marginalization, nothing will change. So, we cannot follow the rules established by our oppressors. So, what I have been working on is something that I have been calling an ethics para joder. Now, for those of you who know Spanish, forgive me. For those who do not know Spanish, I'll try to translate it. Joder is a word you never use in polite conversation. It is equivalent to a certain English word that has 4 letters and begins with F and ends with K. Now, the vulgarity is not the word I'm using. The vulgarity is how my people have to live. And when your people have to live in that vulgarity, sometimes that's the only word that you can use to describe how to respond. So an ethics para joder is based on a Jesus who overturns tables and makes a whip and chases out all the money lenders. Let me tell you where I got this ethics from. I didn't invent it. I study what oppressed people have always done. Oppressed people have always played the trickster. Okay? And you have trickster's image in all communities. In the African American community, you have Bear Bear and Bear Rabbit. In the indigenous community, you have Coyote and you have Spider. And Mexicanos have Cantinflas. Puerto Ricans have Juan Bobo. We Cubans have Pepito. I mean, all communities have your trickster figure. And the purpose of the trickster figure is to be able to say and do things while still staying alive. I think about being as wise as serpents, but gentle as doves. So, back in the day when I was living in New York, there was this group called the Young Lords. I'm not sure if anybody ever heard of them. The Young Lord used to be a gang, a street gang. But they were, they got arrested and in jail. They started reading revolutionary books and their consciousness was raised. And what they did when they came out, they did a couple of things. So I'm going to talk about the New York chapter, which I'm more familiar with. So in New York, what they did was they went ahead and cleaned up all the streets in Spanish Harlem, and they put all the garbage in bags and they put it on a corner. And they called a sanitation department and they said, hey, we cleaned up the streets, can you come pick up the garbage? The sanitation department laughed at them because they only came to communities of color whenever they had any extra free time. So they took those garbage bags and they went to 3rd Avenue and they built a wall and they set it on fire during rush hour traffic. Cops came, beat them up, threw them in jail. But also the New York Times came out and did stories about the sanitation department. And that press led to now the garbage being picked up regularly twice a week. In other words, by screwing with the system, they were able to bring about change. The other thing that they did is they went to the Primera Iglesia Metodista in Spanish Harlem, and they talked to the pastor, and they said, Pastor, we like to, have a food kitchen to feed our kids on the way to school. We want a clothes closet, maybe a couple of lawyers to help our family with their legal issues, some classes on Latino pride. And the pastor looked at them and said, you commies, get out of here. So they came back next Sunday. They picked up the pastor, they threw him out of the church, and they nailed on the door the People's Church. And the church was packed as they did these services until the cops came, beat them up, threw them in jail. So the point I'm getting at is, how do we screw with the system when the system, whether it be the government or the church, refuses to live up to their own rhetoric? See, the issue is not changing them. The issue is having them live up to their rhetoric. What do we do to screw with the system to show them how they fall short of the rhetoric that they expound? Now, I mentioned that I get my inspiration from Jesus overturning the tables at the temple. I get my inspiration from the Young Lords, a group that actually did this. I also get my inspiration from El Egua. Now, my Caribbean folks will probably know who I'm talking about. El Egua is the Afro-Cuban, from the Afro-Cuban religion known as Santeria. Santeria is the practices that the Yoruba people brought to the islands, and it became part of the religiosity of the islands. And El Egua, which is my Orisha, happens to be the trickster. And playing the trickster not only does it come a little bit natural to me, but it also becomes the foundation by which I do my Christianity. And in all honesty, Christianity, every time it goes through a different culture, picks up all the things of that culture that had nothing to do with Christianity. I mean, the reason you believe in souls is because Christianity went to the Greeks first, and they had the concept of souls. The Hebrew Bible never mentioned souls. So as Christianity goes through different cultures, that culture understands and represents Christianity. And so as a child of the Caribbean, my faith is influenced not only by what my people were doing, like the young lords, but also by El Legua. So, as I have 2 minutes left before we open up to Q&A, the ethics that I advocate is how does one nonviolently lies to find out what is true, cheats so that they create a level playing field, steals so they could feed the hungry, joke so they could say truth, disrupt and deceive so that liberation and justice could occur. Gracias.
Let's think we have time for some Q&A.
Okay, we have time for questions. As the questions are asked, can you repeat them since you have mic?
Okay.
Folks, yes, fellas. Come on. You have a question.
Yes.
You spoke about a young lady seeing hope, and then you said, how could she see hope in a hopeless situation? Can you explain, a couple of times you said there can be no hope, there can be no hope. Can you explain how you take a hopeless situation or a hopeless environment or a hopeless family or all of that, and with your belief system, you believe in hope and try to help them believe in hope also, even if it's baby steps hope?
Okay, that's an excellent question. But the question is, how do I talk about hope with families who want to hold on to hope?
Right.
Even though myself, I don't believe in hope. I don't think hope does anything to change the situation.
Does it, okay, let me say this. Do you believe that hope doesn't bring about healing?
Okay. So let me answer that by an example. So one of the things I do is I walk the desert, the trails, and I leave food and water and medicine for those who are crossing over. And I'll never forget this one individual I met who, said that when you leave Mexico, you leave with 2 jugs of water. And you hope that lasts you at least 5 to 6 days for the journey across the desert. So he said early on in the journey, like after one day, he tripped and fell and his 2 jugs fell in the floor and the water wasn't, he had no water. So here he was, he didn't have any water. And then he said, but the Virgin Mary appeared to me and led me to where you are with water. Now, at that moment, a dissertation on Miguel de Unamuno's philosophy would not have been helpful. So instead what I said was, Gloria a la Virgen Maria, Alleluia, praise Jesus, yay, I'm so glad. In other words, my job is not to take hope away from those that have hope. That's not my job. My job is to talk to the people who are already hopeless and let them know it's okay, and not provide them with a false illusion, but to turn that energy into something productive. Because once you are hopeless, many times that could lead to very bad things. It could lead to very bad behavior that is detrimental to oneself. So when I say I am in solidarity with the oppressed, I am thinking of those who already don't have hope. So if you have hope, all power to you. What I am going to push a little bit is how much is that hope based on privilege, and how much is that hope an excuse not to do something? That's where I push. But for those who are struggling, who express hope, I'm all with them. I have no intention of changing their mind. When I was writing my book, Embracing Hopelessness, that deals with this in more philosophical, deeper levels, My TA at the time, my teaching assistant, was a gang member, and he got picked up and arrested. And he asked me, can I take your manuscript to jail with me? And I said, sure. Unbeknownst to me, he began a book club among the other gang members in jail. And what he told me was, yeah, they got it. Look, all this hopelessness stuff, yeah, that's where they are. They got it. And they were encouraged as to what they can do. So those are the people for whom I am talking. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does, but as a person who was once been homeless, and now you walk in hope, don't you think that just things, you know, in what you do provides me, I'll say for instance, myself, if I'm a hopeless individual, I can look at you and say, if he did it, I could do it, and look for some resources that try to make it happen.
See, my fear with that, to be honest with you, I'm curious, anybody ever go to church and hear the sermon about the starfish? You know what I'm talking about? That you know, there's a big storm, and all these starfish are washed up on the beach, and this little girl is throwing them back. And there's a grumpy old man who says, you can't save them all, but she picks up one and says, but I'll make a difference in this one, and throws it in. And the congregation goes, ah, what a beautiful story. Okay. I'm the grumpy old man. And the reason I'm the grumpy old man is because I realize that when we pick up the one and put them on a pedestal, then we could ignore all the other rotting flesh on the beach that is making it difficult for me to even breathe. And I say that because I grew up in Hell's Kitchen. When it was Hell's Kitchen back in the 60s, not the trendy neighborhood it is now. And some of my friends never made it out. They never even made it to become teenagers. Okay? So you can put me on a pedestal and say, oh, look, that Latino, he got out of Hell's Kitchen, and look, he's a professor. I can do that too, we can do it. But by putting me on a pedestal, you ignore all my friends who are 6 feet under. We ignore the reasons why they didn't make it out. And I don't want the focus to be on the one that succeeded. I want it to be on those who didn't make it.
Would it be your responsibility to
I'm sorry, would it be?
Would it be your responsibility to
help those? I'm very much forgive with this.
That is so close. Like what you see now. Just pull back to what's here, Russia. You want to deal with.
Right.
But that's George said that you see it, it's responsibility or helping you up with those that navigate it. You still aren't at the same time giving the other.
Yeah. I guess the question is, if I heard you correctly, what responsibility do I have to those who did not make it? Okay. So my responsibility to those who are not making it is to stand in solidarity with them and to basically share the same fate that they will share. My responsibility is to, because I do have education, to put into words what I am seeing going on, so that I could be, Gramsci called this the organic intellectual, where in solidarity with the oppressed, at the same time communicating this to those who do not have that double consciousness to look at the voice. Yes.
So you speak about how worth this. Yeah, you see it on the thing. See it.
Well, yeah, it's kind of contradictory, isn't it?
No.
But no, but here's the thing.
Something hopeful. Yeah, you got seen too. Oh, like you said, Bible is a leading suspect to it, but that Satan, that's who's reality. Literally, why do you shoot that you know, he said that you are? So the faith is more so trying to look for the future, all kind of teach you and the circumstances, but get people, that's it.
Yeah, what he said. But basically, what I'm saying, what I'm trying to get at is, first of all, if there's a contradiction there, that's okay. Miguel de Unamuno would say, we're humans, therefore we are always contradictory. I mean, and in that tension of contradiction is where I live and find my faith. So it's not an issue of, I have to have all the answers. I definitely don't. It's an issue of recognizing when it seems contradictory and at the same time be grounded in faith. But that faith does not mean it's all going to work out for me. That faith means I could definitely die in this particular administration. That faith means my citizenship, I'm a naturalized citizen, could be taken away and I could be shipped out. See, all these things can happen because they've happened in the past to good people, to faithful people. So my lack of hope prepares me better to deal with the trials and tribulations that I happen to be living through. So it's not an issue of hope is going to somehow relieve me. It's not. Faith is what sustains me in the hopelessness of the situation. Yes.
I'm also struck by the fact that hope means different things for different social locations. And so whether we're talking about hope on an individual or corporate level or a systemic level, if I am a person of European descent who systemically, I'm not talking about individually, systemically, as a corporate entity of a community, has never experienced the hopelessness or desperation that those who are marginalized or pushed to the margin or of color or whatever category, my concept of hope and hopelessness is very different. Yeah. My lens is very different because consciously or unconsciously, I have an expectation of hope to serve me or faith to serve me versus my faith or my hope being a call to action.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so the solidarity of which you speak becomes something that I have to, where's Cayenne? Where you have to embrace the injustice and become one with the injustice, even if it's not an injustice towards you. Right? But I think there's a fundamental different comprehension, being of Euro descent, of how I experience hope from a point of privilege.
Absolutely. And from that, but hopefully, no pun intended, you might walk away with is that if you're talking to somebody who is hopeless, don't try to make them hopeful. Respect with the space that they're occupying. It's not your job to make them feel hope. It's a job to be in solidarity with them at the place there is. And what I always find interesting about these conversations, I spoke about hopelessness, and then I spoke a lot about what to do in the hopelessness, but we get stuck on the hope and hopelessness. If you have hope, all power to you. Really, bless you. Great. Hallelujah. That's not the issue that I really want to talk about. I want to talk about how do we screw with the system to basically overturn the injustices that is creating the hopelessness in so many of our people.
Right.
That's the issue. Yes, sir.
Can you say more about meeting people when they are?
Yes.
Especially when we come from a place where you have room oriented, consciously, to all the way to try to lift somebody. How do you work from that place of a person sitting before you in the hopelessness?
Yeah.
And how do you stay there? What is the benefit of it?
Did I mention that I'm a Southern Baptist minister?
No?
I'm an ordained Southern Baptist. Crazy. I went to the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary in Louisville, Kentucky.
Yeah.
So I was taught that when I'm counseling someone, to have that smile, to have the conviction and the confidence of the power of the Holy Spirit and Jesus Christ, and to convey that hope to the individual. But those individuals still committed suicide. Because for them it was hopeless. And if I met them where they were at, as you just said, and then tried to sugarcoat the horrors of what they're facing, and instead be in solidarity in the Holy Saturday in where they find themselves, I might have been more helpful. So I think what gets in my way is this religious training that has the answer, when in reality, I just have the questions. And the questions is basically, what do you need from me? Not what ideology or theology or doctrine I need to expound. So at least as a minister, that's where I find myself now. So if somebody, like I said, like I met the guy in the desert, was hopeful, yay. But I mostly meet people who no longer have hope. And I'm surprised how many more people are in that hopeless state today than they were 4 months ago.
Yeah.
Other questions?
I have a question.
Yes.
And I'm just coming from my perspective, trying to learn. Is it also could be hopelessness of like, I realize nothing's guaranteed past this moment.
Got nothing?
Is guaranteed past this moment.
yeah.
For any of us.
Absolutely, absolutely. You know,
Coming to turn, like surrendering to that and yeah.
yeah. I mean, the way I look at it is, oh, I'm sorry. That part of hopelessness is realizing that nothing is guaranteed after this moment. Yeah. If we believe that it's all going to work out, yay. But the problem is it doesn't. People still get slaughtered. Brown bodies are still dropping in the desert. My country has been fighting for its liberation and had been a satellite of empires ever since its founding. There is no hope. You know, and if you tell me, well, in 200 years from now, it's going to work out, well, that's nice, but I'm not going to be around. That's not going to help me. You know, I always think of, if I could go back in time to 1600s and go to the slave quarters and tell the enslaved that, don't worry, one day we'll have a black president, how is that hopeful when they and their children and their children's children and their children's children's children will be born into slavery and die? If I go to the indigenous people today, do I tell them, well, don't worry, you will one day have your land back? That's not going to happen. There's no hope for them. They're never going to get their land back. The Taino people will never have their land back. So this illusion of hope prevents us from dealing with the reality of how systemic and how deep oppression really is. And in that reality, how do we bring about change? And I could work on that because, like I said, it doesn't depend on me.
Would you, just in what you're saying now, based off of that, would you suggest or think that we are where we are now because we put too much faith in hope, especially as a Eurocentric country, thinking it's all going to turn out okay, and never doing the work that we needed to do in terms of healing, in terms of reparations, in terms of acknowledging our two original sins of genociding natives and enslavement, and by completely ignoring and just saying it'll work out? Like, that's what I'm hearing from you.
Yeah. Oh,
that
absolutely.
it's that false sense of hope that has really led us to where we are right now.
And I would even go a little further in saying the hope that very recently that the president of the Senate has, that it's all going to work out and we could probably negotiate and we could there's this false hope that 4 years are going to go by and we'll get back to normal, depending on how the election goes, and
But it appeases the masses.
But yeah, it keeps people. As long as I have hope, I won't have to do anything because it's in God's hands.
Right.
So if it's in God's hands, who am I?
What's happening all around us right now is we give in to the demands that are being made. I'm watching organizations after organizations down say,
Yep.
yes, I will do what you told me to do because in a few years I'll get back.
Right.
And
Capitulation.
I've seen it 4 times today.
Yep.
But how can I say? So in my profession as an academic, many people say, well, when you become an academic, don't say anything because you need to get tenure.
Yeah.
And then once you get tenure, well, don't say anything, you need to become a full professor. Well, 14 years go by and you just learn not to say anything.
That's right.
So you get domesticated. So yeah, constantly giving in and saying, well, no, it's going to work out in 4 years from now. This can't last long. It's like, there's no guarantee. See, one of the problems I think that we have is that we have bought into this Hegelian understanding of history, which in short basically means that history is in an upward progression. Things are going to get better and better and better, and then we're going to arrive at some utopia. Capitalism is a salvation history. Rising tide lifts all boat. Communism is a salvation history. We're going to get the communist state at the end. Both of these economic structures are trends of modernity. And therefore, there's this belief that you're right, these are bad now, but that's okay, cycles, we're going to get better, we're going to be at a better place. I unfortunately drank the postmodern Kool-Aid, in where basically I don't believe in any Hegelian movement of time. Things could get better, they could get worse, they could go backwards, they could be totally a different thing. It's disconnected. So there is no guarantee that tomorrow we'll have a democracy. Well, there's no guarantee we ever had a democracy, now that I think about it.
Yeah.
I mean, if we're going to be honest. But, it's a little bit better than what we have now. So we don't know. We don't know what tomorrow will bring. And therefore, to hope that tomorrow is going to be better because of this imaginary movement of history becomes a bit of an illusion. It's kind of like, you ever notice that every once in a while somebody finds Jesus in a tortilla?
Yeah.
You always put something in the tortilla. Yeah. And what happens is, a Korean scientist wired people's brains and discovered that when we see chaos, our minds are geared to try to find something that we recognize, like a face. So whenever you look at static images, you will see a face. Reading Walter Benjamin, who talks about history, he also talks about that we impose upon the movement of history an order so that we can feel safe about tomorrow. But the problem is, there is no order to history. So the historians go back and they find different points in time to string together so they could argue whatever they want history to say today so they could give them permission to do what they want to do tomorrow. So I don't believe that we have any order to history. Therefore, if there is no order to history, there can be no hope for the future.
And as long as we believe that, we're not going to do anything.
Right, because if we just keep our mouth shut, we keep our eyes down, we'll survive this, life goes on, we'll be okay. Joder. Screw with the system.
Yeah.
Mess with the system. And the beauty of that is that it gives me peace. Because, like I said, it doesn't depend on me. I just have to be faithful to being in solidarity with the march line.
So I'm not going to say anything else, but being a person who was once black and then became African American, but still who identifies with being black, growing up in the 60s, times when, having grandparents and great-grandparents that talked about the stuff that you're talking about, the hopelessness and feeling like, well, I didn't come from a family that felt like things would never get better. And now being in the climate that we're in, and people of all races and all colors are feeling that same pinch and foot on the throat and everything that, the former slaves did and their children. It's a reality, like you're saying, something has to be done. But I know people, African-American people, that don't want to help do it because they feel like we didn't break it, so why should we? And it's maybe not the best thought, but still standing on hope. Like, we've been there. Yeah. We did this. So my grandchildren, I'm still going to instill hope in them. Even if it takes 200 years, maybe their children choke. That's why I said that. Even an oppressed person, I'll identify with their oppression because I do, but I'm still going to try to instill some kind of hope. That's just me. That's what I was saying. It's not that I don't believe what you say because you have statistics and all of that, but that's what I'm saying.
It all power to you. By all means, I have no desire to take away anyone's hope, but I am speaking to the hopeless.
Right.
And I'm speaking to the hopeless who every day increase in numbers because the illusion that it's all going to work out has consistently failed. And when you say, we didn't break it, they're not, one of the things I also like to say is that I don't want to talk truth to power.
I'm talking about, I'll be honest, the election, that's how a lot of people of color feel like. So, nothing else but that.
I hear you. But one of the things that people say, I should speak truth to power. And I keep saying, I have no desire to waste my time speaking truth to power because power already knows the truth. They know the truth. Trump knows what's going on. He knows the truth. I'd rather speak truth to the powerless who have been convinced that the truth of the powerful is true. And that's where my focus and my conversation is geared towards.
Goodness. Yeah.
One more question. Yes, sir.
One more question.
So I don't think the homeless population here in New York is very obvious, super population at times. So I have a lot of colleagues that I see wrestling with this type of stuff as well, that being paralyzed by the belief in the attachment to hope that you mentioned earlier. So I guess my question is, where do we start this conversation with other people facing this, trying to help out, but burning out? Is there a good book you recommend, whether it's one of yours or somebody you admire that is accessible that can help us start this conversation?
Yeah. So in a shameless act of self-promotion, I did write a book called Embracing Hopelessness, which the whole purpose of that book is, it's more of a philosophical book that looks at different communities, the Korean community, the African American community, the indigenous community, the Jewish community, and of course my Latino community. And it looks at hope in those different communities. And I had a conversation partner from those communities that we talked, that we recorded to try to understand this. And then it ends with, what do we do, which is screwing with the system. So that would be the book that I would recommend. There's not that many people who are talking about hopelessness. It's a bit of a downer. It's not like exactly, you all came thinking about hope in the midst, and you just got, sideswiped. But see, and that's maybe the trickster playing. But the point I'm getting at is, it's a conversation that I think is now really beginning to develop as more people are being real with where we are. Yes.
So
I'm struggling with everything you're saying too, and I'm an advocate for the liberation of Palestine, and when I see what's happening in Gaza, one of the things that they keep after every bombardment is Hatbilna wa ni'mal wakeel, which means in God we put our faith and our trust. So what is the power structure that you say that we have to defeat? What would you say to people who are in that type of homelessness, being bombed, misery, that having our government, a wide world bombed, and for me to live in a country, knowing my taxes support that?
Right.
What is the power structure that we need to fight against? I mean, a war machine.
So,
What would be the message to those people who really try to hold on to hope?
right.
And we indigenous people outside.
Fantastic question. On October 6th, I was in Palestine giving this lecture at Dar al-Kamia University in Bethlehem. And I gave the same lecture about hopelessness with Mitri Rafib, who is the president of the university there. And one of the women stood up and said, "Are you sure you're not Palestinian?" Because she understood that hopelessness I was speaking. Now, to be fair, another gentleman stood up and told me I was totally wrong. As a Palestinian, he believed in hope. But it was this woman that I was really speaking to. The next day, as I was leaving, is when the war began. Rita Raib and myself have a book coming out in November called Tear Down These Walls, in where we compare the Palestinian separation war with the war on the border. I brought him out here to the border down here in Arizona, and he took me to Palestine to spend months there studying the situation. So we have that book coming out where we talk about some of these situations. I don't have the hubris to say what Palestinians need to be doing. All I'm saying is I have shared this hopelessness with many Palestinians in Palestine. Matter of fact, I just came back from a conference in Jordan, in where I gave a paper called Confessions of Christian Zionists, in where the hopelessness of an evangelical movement that believes in Christian Zionism, you're not going to eliminate that in this country. It is the foundation of the return of Jesus Christ, and
So what do we fight back against if it's not? That's such a powerful stuff to touch and all the other. That point, we were saying to fight the
fight
the system. So which system do we fight?
It's not so much fight, it's screw with the system. How do we screw with all these systems that exist? I don't have an answer. To be honest with you, is for the Palestinian people to find out ways of screwing with the system. And you're right, when you're getting bombed, they're terrorists. Yeah, then you get bombing. It's kind of hard to think about these things when bombs are falling on your head. So I guess that leaves it up to those of us who are not Palestinians to find ways of screwing with the systems here, to be in solidarity with our siblings there. The way I'm doing it is, like I said, I'm constantly traveling, talking about some of these issues of hopelessness in the Palestinian situation. Not to tell Palestinians what they should be doing. I'm basically talking about why I am, as a Latino man in this country, am hopeless. And does it resonate? For some it does, for some it doesn't.
Yeah, I just want to say that might look different for different people.
Yeah.
Or has a screw with it.
Right. Absolutely.
One might be speaking now, but one might protest, one might, whatever. I think that's going to look different for different people.
Absolutely.
How
do you, how do you hold those in power to the rhetoric they expound? That becomes really the issue. Yeah. Thank you very much.
I think there's a good chance that we could go on for hours. I don't know how we would survive afterwards, though, just being having our noodle twisted, as it were. I think, Flo, what you were just saying, and I don't mean to put words into your mouth, Miguel, what you were just saying about it's going to look different for different, what was coming to my mind was the fact of what the universities are doing right now, right? That they are in solidarity with one another. And what I said when we first got in here tonight, this, and every other time we gather when we're not supposed to, I think is a way that we kind of learn what that is on some level. I don't know if I'm paraphrasing that ridiculously or not, but anyway, take a deep breath, please. Okay. It's probably a little heavier than you wanted. That was the point. The point was for us to be in a space where we were called into accountability because that's who we say we want to be in this community, so that we can continue to work for the betterment of York and every other place and person that we touch. So one more time, I thank you so much for being here tonight.